sustainability simply means the interaction or the interrelationship between environment, economics, and social justice. Importantly, sustainability does not mean going green. It's something more than going green. Green is just one of the three dimensions of sustainability.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Ira, please go ahead.
Well, welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Ira Feldman. I'm delighted to be here. I guess the best way of describing myself is that I'm a sustainability professional. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with sustainability terminology, in my book, sustainability simply means the interaction or the interrelationship between environment, economics, and social justice. Importantly, sustainability does not mean going green. It's something more than going green. Green is just one of the three dimensions of sustainability. So with that basic out of the way, what does it mean? What am I actually doing as a sustainability professional? A lot of folks say Ira wears many hats in the sustainability universe, and this is true. I've cut across many sustainability domains, including in terms of functional roles as an attorney, a management consultant, an international standards developer, political advisor, and a university faculty member. So I cut across all of those domains, and I would like to think that I've made some significant contributions in, among other places, to sustainability law and policy, to sustainability in higher education, and in a number of other realms. So in my 30-year career, I'm a lawyer by training, but with a broad and deep interdisciplinary background around the theme of environmental effects on human health, especially in urban areas. So I won't go into all the different nooks and crannies that encompasses, but basically that has allowed me to become familiar with everything from human biology and ecosystem biology to urban design and regional planning. I've had a career in major law firms, then at US EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. As of now, I have my own interdisciplinary consulting group known as Greentrack Strategies. I have a not-for-profit organization known as Adaptation Leader, which focuses on climate adaptation and resilience. And then for sustainability in higher education, I have a not-for-profit organization that helps university-level faculty understand what sustainability is all about, because, as I mentioned at the outset, especially in the United States, too many people believe that sustainability is simply about going green, and it's a lot more than that.
Your interest, was that purely, from, a little voice inside, or were you parents? Was your family, were they also involved with these type of issues?
I think I've
Were they?
always had the little voice inside,
Hmm.
although my parents were tremendous in that regard in encouraging me when they
Hmm.
saw that this is what I was interested in. They did everything to help me advance those interests, whether it be in terms of books and other materials, or going to special programs, or going to, you know, on field trips. They were 100%, 110% behind me. And I would add that as I moved from childhood to young adult, and while still in high school, um, I'm old enough to have been around at the original Earth Day, 1970. And so I helped run the original Earth Day program at my high school alma mater. And there were actually other students who were more into the environmental science and environmental policy, and I kind of came in through the back door. I was artistically gifted, and so they asked me to do all of the environmental posters for Earth Day. I still have many of
Really?
them in the garage.
Okay.
They're
Yeah.
definitely collector's items. But this my high school was a prep school in Brooklyn called Poly Prep, and I've stayed involved with Poly Prep to the point where today I am an advisor and contributor to their sustainability education program. And indeed, because my parents were so supportive of my career in environment
Hmm.
and sustainability, I donated a sculpture, a work of art that is shaped like a globe, and donated it to the school as the annual Poly Prep Sustainability Prize
Hmm.
for the student who has the most potential to get into the sustainability field. And so that award is the Nathan and Estelle Feldman Sustainability Prize, named after my parents.
Wow. Oh, that's a great story. That's beautiful. Um, Ira, you have done so many things, but I would like to uh, talk with you about your time at the EPA. How did you get involved um, at this government agencies? And because I have a global audience, can you also explain that what the EPA stands for?
US EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency,
Mhm.
which is a federal level environmental regulatory agency. Um, EPA has its headquarters in Washington, D.C., but it also has regional offices in each region of the country. And then, without getting too far into the weeds, those regional offices interface with state level environmental regulatory agencies, which actually implement some of the federal programs. That's known as delegation. I was actually recruited out of law school by a major New York law firm
Hmm.
to help them start an environmental practice group in New York, which is something that didn't exist in New York at that time. And so I jumped at that opportunity and joined a Park Avenue law firm. I stayed with them for 2 years, and then realized that to get the kind of training that I needed to go to Washington, D.C., which was still really the focus of the environmental law and policy field. I came down to Washington, D.C. for a couple of years with an even bigger law firm, hoping that even bigger New York-based law firm would send me back to New York at some point. That didn't happen because I ended up one summer apparently being bitten by a deer tick. So I ended up with Lyme disease, and
Hmm.
late stage Lyme disease can be kind of crippling if it's not caught early.
Yeah.
Mine was not caught early, And so I went on the, as we say in Major League Baseball, I went on the disabled list for the better part of a year. And when I was feeling about 80% back to full strength, I said, it's time to go back to work. I couldn't go back to work at a major law firm at that stage because it really was a 24/7 type of environment. And I literally went with the, idea that you could get by doing a government job on a 9 to 5 basis, which sounds a bit dismissive of government jobs. And some people do try to get through without putting the extra effort in. But the short version is that I decided to look for a position at US EPA simply because I had anticipated while I was in law school that I would spend some time at US EPA. In fact, it was a surprise to me that I started my career at a major law firm. I really hadn't expected that. I was excited to join US EPA headquarters. I joined there as a RCRA enforcement attorney, which means hazardous waste regulatory enforcement. And very quickly, I gained a high degree of notoriety, in part because I became the headquarters attorney on 3 of the largest RCRA enforcement actions, hazardous waste enforcement actions ever. And they all settled for multi-million-dollar settlements. So with a reputation as a million-dollar man, I was then able to write my ticket within EPA, and I shifted from the enforcement side to the compliance side. And that's when I really hit my stride, and what I call the triple crown of activities at EPA, for which I was awarded a number of EPA administrator medals. The 3 in brief: I developed the EPA audit and self-disclosure policy. I was the architect of EPA's first corporate environmental excellence program. And back in the enforcement side, I pioneered the use of environmental management systems in enforcement settlements. These are all things that had never been done before. I remain very proud of that work. It all took place in the mid-90s. Before, what makes it more remarkable is it was before there was an international standard for environmental management systems. In other words, it was before ISO 14001. So with that, all of that put me at the forefront of innovative environmental regulation, and that gets into the use of standards and soft law that I mentioned earlier.
That's very impressive. Yeah, if you name one thing that you learned or experienced that is really still important for you, what you do today, or how you look at sustainability, especially.
And it would be remiss of me to not underscore how important the existing framework at EPA is. No one, certainly not me, no one is suggesting that that whole regulatory apparatus needs to be scrapped. We need to restructure things, but the basic air, water, and waste regulation over a 30 to 40-year period has led to tremendous improvement in the United States. And really, the US led the world for many years on environmental regulation. That's no longer the case, although many environmental professionals in the United States still believe that it's the case. It's just that they're out of step with how far ahead lots of other developed countries have gone. There's a lot that the United States can learn from other countries right now, including, I'll just mention three, the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany. And I mentioned those three because those are the three countries that I decided to focus on as I pursue my late career PhD. So I am intentionally studying the sustainability policies of those three countries because I'm hoping that I will have an opportunity to advise on how we finally get to that next generation of environmental law and policy here.
Right. Well, okay, that's interesting. I would like to jump to where you started and talking about sustainability and your definition, and then quickly explain why your what I consider a holistic definition of sustainability is the way to go, and how that informs the work that you do, and especially your no, you pick one of the three, where you explain what you do, and yeah, elaborate on that to our listeners.
So let's start with the definition of sustainability and why that's a better way to go. So I'm generally distinguishing a sustainability framed regulatory policy regime in the United States in contrast to the now 50-year-old, the basic US environmental statutes are all roughly 50 years old. The original Earth Day was 1970. The original statutes followed soon thereafter. So, they've been around a long time. They've periodically been amended, but not fundamentally altered. And what that has led to over the years is this stovepiped approach to what we would call single media, either air or water or waste. And that ignores the reality, the physical reality, the ecosystem reality that all of these media, and when I'm talking media in this environmental policy context, I'm talking about air, water, and waste. I'm not talking about TV and newspapers. So when you're talking about air, water, and waste pursued in a systems approach, that is known in the field as a multimedia approach. And sustainability is because of its systemic, holistic approach, its forward-looking approach, its multi-stakeholder approach. It would be much more effective for implementing a next generation policy framework.
I would still to bring you back to the definition of sustainability, because your definition of sustainability is not only about environmental sustainability. You also mention economic development and social justice.
Right.
So those three dimensions. So if we as a world talk about sustainability, why should we look at the issue from these three lenses? Why are they related?
So I think the environmental piece I've covered well in
Yes.
terms of the air, water, waste, stovepipes. The economics piece, the most important thing to understand in moving from an old understanding to a new understanding of sustainability is that for years, more progressive minds have suggested that it's just been wrong to view environmental compliance as a resource drain, that it was actually a win-win situation, that there were benefits to being a good environmental citizen. And if an organization were to adopt a sustainability approach under the definition that I'm talking about, it simply means that they've accepted the mindset that doing good for the environment is also doing good for business. And there are numerous examples of that, and you don't have to point to, the fact that the fundamental fact that anything that amounts to a waste product is costing a company money. That's on the economics side. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be said about economics at the macro level, not just the micro level. But the social justice side, the reason why that's important to include within the fundamental definition of sustainability, and this is, I'll just add, because we may not have time to circle back to this. This is one of the challenges faced by the Biden administration when they came up with their theme of climate and justice, which sounds great to almost all of my colleagues. What that failed to do what was to include justice as an incorporated piece of the whole framework. It's still, if you're talking about climate and justice is still like an add-on. And a sustainability approach acknowledges that social justice is just as core to what you're doing as the economy and the environment. And takes some time for people to wrap their heads around that, but the looking at the negative may help explain that. And in the Biden administration, they have the so-called Justice 40 initiative, where they're trying to direct 40% of all federal government funding to disadvantaged areas. And it's been very difficult to implement that program because there really is no consensus on what the right way is to do that. It might have been smoother, rather than trying to jam in that 40% requirement as an add-on. It might have been better, not stating for a fact, but I believe that if they had started by educating the public on what a sustainability framework meant and why social justice was incorporated into that as a basic prong of sustainability, I think we might have been further along by now on environmental justice.
Okay. No, thanks for that, Ira. And I mean, just for the listeners, I mean, to remind them or to point them at previous guests from the podcast. I have had a conversation with Kees Klomp from the Netherlands, who wrote a book, Thrive, where a number of renowned economic thinkers like Kate Raworth with her donut economics, are basically alluding to what you also spoke about in terms of, one of the reasons that we already crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries is probably because, our economic system is based on extraction, only focusing on humanity, not about a balance between, human beings and nature. And, what you are also referring to is, when you want to make this world more sustainable for both humans as well as, the rest of nature, the rest of the planet, you need to keep those 3 dimensions in mind. And
And
right?
You're absolutely right. When I do my introductory explanations of sustainability in my graduate level courses, what you just mentioned, the planetary boundaries approach and the Oxfam donut, those have been tremendously influential over the past 10 years. And, that is the kind of material that certainly my students come away with a new appreciation of sustainability. I wish that we could mandate everyone on Capitol Hill taking a short primer on planetary boundaries and the Oxfam donut, because many of them, and this is verified by talks that I give on Capitol Hill, when I share some of the things that are common knowledge in the field. I have members of Congress and their staff, still more or less stuck in a mindset of 20 years earlier, and they just haven't kept up to speed with whether it's developments in ecosystem services or in understanding that, as I mentioned earlier, that other countries have more sophisticated environmental regulatory programs than we do now.
Okay. That's okay. Let me have you pick one of the things that you do. Your Greentrack strategies, your adaptation leader work, or your Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. Which one will you share with the listeners today?
Well, they're all my children, and they're all dear to me. But I think that what makes sense is, for purposes of today, is to just indicate what I'm trying to do with Adaptation Leader, the not-for-profit. And the mission of Adaptation Leader, simply stated, is to raise literacy on climate adaptation and resilience. Why, you ask, is it necessary at this late date to raise literacy on adaptation and resilience? Well, there's that unfortunately word again. Unfortunately, even though there's been a lot of attention paid to climate change over the past 20 years, and we have thankfully almost moved past the period where climate deniers have any leg to stand on. Even if everyone agreed that climate change was a problem, especially in the US, I would say to your international listeners, the attention has been almost exclusively paid to greenhouse gas reduction, which is the mitigation side of the climate conversation. Almost no one in the professional climate field in the United States over the past 10 years has focused exclusively on adaptation and resilience. It's certainly a much better situation today than it was 5 years ago or 8 years ago. In many different ways. There's even a professional society for adaptation professionals, but the capacity to deal with adaptation is very low among professionals, and the literacy in the general public about adaptation is still virtually non-existent. I hate to sound alarmist on that, but the reason why I know there's a role for my not-for-profit is that there is a need across all stakeholder groups, across business, government, academia, to elevate the understanding of adaptation to where the understanding of mitigation has been all along, because of one simple fact. Even if we quit carbon emissions cold turkey tomorrow, from everything that has been put up there since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the climate is going to continue to change for another 100 to 200 years, even if we quit cold turkey. And so that means we're going to have to adapt, and we don't know how. There are some good ideas out there, but for anyone getting into the climate change space now, I urge them to pay attention to the adaptation side, not just the mitigation side. The two things that I'm doing with Adaptation Leader now, the two special initiatives or projects. One focuses on the failure of the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to include anything meaningful about adaptation in their proposed climate disclosure rules. And so we've been banging the drum, particularly here inside the Beltway, to get folks to realize that the proposed rule and likely whatever gets finalized in the coming months will still be inadequate with respect to adaptation. The second initiative that we are championing has to do with the notion of receiving communities. In other words, communities that are receiving climate migrants. And in this, I'm not even talking about climate migrants from Africa or Europe or South America coming to the United States. That's certainly an issue, and migration in general is a big and controversial issue. The distinction that I'm making is if you understand the science within the United States itself, there will be internal displacement of many millions of people, and no one is planning for it yet. And we don't know exactly what the timeline for that is going to be, but one well-regarded study suggested that over the next 30 to 50 years, over 12 million people just on the East Coast will be displaced by sea level rise. That doesn't include the rest of the country or other climate impacts. That by itself ought to be a wake-up call. And so we are trying to develop a research and policy agenda for receiving communities. I can stop there.
Okay, clear. I would like us to go to the second part of the conversation, and that's a little bit more rapid fire. So quick questions, quick answers, when we, maneuver ourselves through a wide range of topics and short conversations. You might know or you might not know that this particular podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started in 2012. And so during COVID, I was not able to walk with other people. So I missed that. So I started reaching out to folks to virtually walk with me. But the reason that I started to walk the 100-mile walk in 2012 is that what I try to do is to raise awareness and funds to end hunger, poverty, and injustice. So I walk within a week 15 to 20 miles per day. If you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, for which cause would you walk and why?
The alternate phrasing of your question as to what drives me is I really am driven to make a difference and to make some sort of contribution while I'm still around. I view myself as now entering the final third of my career, and I still have a lot to accomplish, a lot to give, and I expect that most of that will happen in the climate change domain. So, the raising awareness of adaptation and resilience would have me walking 100 miles.
We talked about sustainability. Sustainability is also very important for me, and I definitely can relate with how you define it. For my organization, the Sustainable Development Goals are very important. It's not perfect, but at least it's what we have. It's what we agreed upon as a world, that we aim for these goals. We are only at 15% on average in terms of reaching those goals. Now, yeah, I've then come across a growing group of people that says, one of the reasons that we are not making the progress that we need to make is that we are not paying attention to the ability, skills, and knowledge that we need as individuals and as communities to make those system changes work. And they came up with the inner development goals. I have two quick questions. I know this, I understand this is, we could talk hours about this.
Yes.
But the two questions are, what would you like my audience to know about the Sustainable Development Goals? And then the second part is, have you heard about the inner development goals and what are your initial thoughts?
Sure. So, in brief, I'll just pick up what you said about the Sustainable Development Goals. They're certainly not perfect. And when those of us who sat down to develop the SDGs, and I was among those who participated in the open process to develop the SDGs, if you would have asked anyone if they thought we would have ended up with 17 goals, everyone would have thought you were crazy. And so we ended up with crazy. It's just very unwieldy and far from ideal. But when you dig below the number 17 and you look at the approach, as I have, because that study, that ongoing study that I mentioned earlier about sustainability policy in the Netherlands, Germany, and the UK, what I'm actually looking at more specifically is how those three countries are aligning with the SDGs. And so obviously, based on that, now you understand that I think the SDGs are fundamentally important because they lay out an approach that is known as governing by goals. So we have 17 goals, and the way the goals are laid out, the understanding is that each country can attempt in its own way to achieve each of those 17 goals. I can go on and on about the SDGs because that literally is my dissertation topic, but I was glad that you pointed me to the inner development goals for a few reasons. First of all, I did take a look at them. I think I think they're onto something. I think that it is related to one of the challenges in implementing the SDGs is that there's a lack of capacity and there's a lack of education. And the lack of when dealing with the lack of capacity, it's not just formal education in the classroom. It's, I think you were talking about knowledge, skills, and attributes, the KSAs, which are pretty well-known framework in, for example, sustainability in higher education, which is another one of my domains. So in looking at the different categories that the inner development goals identified, and I really wasn't able to go further into looking at any results of any of their activities, but I certainly am going to take a closer look at the categorizations that they establish because I think they're valid.
Okay. One of the things that I hope to contribute to, because I think in the world we have a lot of polarization, and if we would work on our empathic skills, relating, collaborating, that will definitely help us to move forward. So I hope that this podcast is contributing to connecting people and that they realize, we initially thought that we were very different from this person, but there are some things that make sense, and let's try to start this conversation. So I've rolled it into a question, and that is, I always have a question from the previous guest, for the current guest, and the question for you is.
I think it's, we've talked quite a bit about it, of course, not surprisingly, when it comes to 29K and IDGs, but I would flip it then to really want to ask the next guest on what qualities, abilities, or skills do they believe we need to develop to change our trajectory and to start to build a more sustainable and regenerative future for people and planet. And I think with that, I would add then, if you could imagine a place where we together can learn and develop these qualities, abilities, and skills, what would that place or places look like, and how could we ensure access for all?
And I understand, you could start telling me about your PhD, but okay, within the minute.
I'll take it in a different direction.
Okay.
And, this, of course, is not an easy question to answer. It's the question of our times, because the litany of challenges that you just listed, taken together, we have to concede that the situation is a polycrisis, and there are no easy answers in dealing with a polycrisis or wicked problems individually, like climate change. By definition, wicked problems are very difficult to resolve. And so, my overall take on the polycrisis and the panoply of issues that we're facing, there are a lot of people who are in serious psychological distress these days, and giving up, even just from concerns about climate change, without even getting into the full litany that you shared. I guess with my background, I come at it from the perspective of wondering whether we're going to be able to develop the policies and construct the new institutions that are going to be needed to deal with the polycrisis, because it's pretty clear that what we have now is not adequate, and it's also pretty clear that most folks are not great at visualizing the future, particularly in uncertain times. So dealing with that, I think, is going to be a challenge. But I do have one recommended approach, and there are people experimenting in a variety of different ways already, not necessarily in response to taking a step or two back and saying, we're in a polycrisis, so we're going to go do something different. But in what I have been reviewing, and I think that there is a great potential in scaling up, is the whole question of intentional communities. I don't know if you or your listeners have ever come across that term before, but basically, intentional communities are of many different types. The most familiar to American ears would be eco-villages. The most familiar to those in Europe might be transition towns. And what all these intentional communities have in common is that they're a different way of setting up governing and social structures. And what I believe is, if we could pilot a range of different intentional communities, the ones that are successful could then be templates for scaling up. And if the goal of an intentional community is to more effectively deal with a polycrisis by implementing different policies and different institutions, that's how I think we can start to make some progress on that. I actually would like to have the opportunity to prove that in the context of some of my work. So I have been giving that a great deal of thought.
Your question for the next guest.
To steal something that I saw from other possibilities where we might have gone today, and combine it with some of my answer. So if for the next guest, if you took a step or two back and evaluated the current situation at the global, national, and local level, is there one particular song you would suggest paying attention to the lyrics to help us get through these difficult times? And I will say that in case you want to know, I saw that there was a possibility that you might ask me that question.
Yeah,
And
I'm always asking, the question of, is there a song or a piece of music that embodies for a big part what you are about, and which song or piece of music would that be and why?
well, I can answer that for you now in case you want to use it.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether you were skipping that or not, but I gave a fair amount of thought to that, and I didn't go with a contemporary piece. And it may sound a little odd to you and your listeners, but I came up with the song from the movie Casablanca,
Mhm.
As Time Goes By. And why would I come up with that? Well, I went back and I looked at the lyrics, and there's certainly a lot to like in those lyrics. It's a romantic song, but for me, that song is evocative of an era that is kind of mirror image of today, where most of Europe was facing down fascism. That was really the theme of the movie. And as time goes by, the lyrics get into fundamentals like love and hate and jealousy. And in extrapolating that to my own work in the climate change space, the lines that mean something to me and maybe not to anybody else: a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. And I think our work in climate change now is a case of do or die.
These conversations always go fast, Ira. So I would like to thank you for your willingness to talk with me today, for everything you do. Yeah, and maybe any question that I should have asked you, but I didn't today.
I'm just glad there weren't more questions, because now I have to go get a drink and recover.
Okay,
But
thank you
I
so much.
enjoyed it.
Me too.
Your questions got me thinking, and I hope that you and your audience will get something out of the final cut.
Well, I did, and I'm sure the listeners as well. So thank you so much, and good luck with, well, everything you do, of course. So. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.